take your shoes off.
Why the hell you dressed like a chicken?
I'm up here, you morons! Come and get me. You guys give up, or you're thirsty for more?
Heads up! Don't worry, Marv, I'll get him for you. Yes.
He's only a kid, Harry. We can take him.
Oh, shut up, will you?
Oh,
What is it?
you're missing some teeth.
Where? That's my gold-tooth. My gold-tooth. I'll kill him. I'll kill him. You bomb me with one more can cake, and I'll snap up your cojones and boil the motor oil.
911 emergency.
Oh, my house is being robbed. My address is 656 Lincoln Boulevard. My name's Murphy.
We kind of wanted to focus on the physics of this classic Christmas movie, in this scene specifically with the pendulums and how this 8-year-old kid was able to accurately set up 2 pendulums with enough force to kind of knock 2 guys out and push them all the way down the stairs and still have time to escape. So we started by finding the period of both pendulums, which turns out are equal because they have the same length, but because we couldn't really see this length, we kind of improvised and took a trip down to the library. One of us stood at the top of the staircase while the other stood a couple stairs up from the bottom, and we measured from the top down to the head of one of our lab partners. So when calculating, we found this length to be close to 3 meters, so we plugged that into the period equation of 2 pi times the square root of the length divided by the gravity, and this calculation came out to be close to 3.475 seconds. And this is for both of the pendulums because they do have the same length. We then calculated the energy for each individual pendulum. Started by finding the kinetic energy of the first pendulum, and we used the equation 1/2 mv squared plus mgh, and we found that the average mass of a full paint can is 1.361 grams, and we found the velocity by calculating 1.361 grams divided by the 1.8 seconds it took for the throw of the first paint can to hit the face, and we got 0.75 seconds. And then we went ahead and plugged this into the equation. After plugging the mass and velocity into the equation, we ended up getting 40.396 joules of energy in the first paint can pendulum. So we use the same equation to calculate the second kinetic energy of the second paint can, and for this velocity we used the same 1.361 grams, but we divided it by 1.09 seconds because this one took a little bit longer, and we got a final velocity of 1.25 meters per second. We then plugged this mass and velocity into the same equation to then get a kinetic energy of 41.545 joules. This one's a little bit higher than the last kinetic energy just because the velocity was slightly larger. This diagram shows us the difference between kinetic and potential energies. We could kind of see that kinetic energy is maximized at the middle of each oscillation, which in this case is right below the drop-off, and that's where the robbers are being hit with the paint cans. So being hit with 40 to 41 joules of energy is kind of a strong force to feel, especially when you're walking upstairs. That explains why it kind of throws them backwards, making them fly down the stairs. Potential energy is kind of highest at those points of rest at the top of each oscillation. So in this diagram, it kind of is shown by that left red paint can. It's kind of hitting that cutoff point, which is causing it to go to rest and turn back down, go the other way. So I would say the left can is kind of at that maximum potential energy, and the can on the right kind of demonstrates the equilibrium between the two, as the kinetic energy is kind of maximized at the bottom of each oscillation and potential energy is maximized at the top where it's at rest. That middle can kind of shows the equal balance of potential energy and kinetic energy in a can. There were a couple things that we kind of didn't take into consideration when calculating the kinetic energy. One of the main things that we didn't really take into account was outside forces. Like Kevin throwing the paint cans. He definitely could have thrown one harder than he threw the other, but for this calculation, we are kind of just assuming that there was no outside force, that he threw them both with equal forces, and just going to assume that he didn't throw one harder than he threw the other. Another thing that we didn't really take into consideration was differences in masses. For instance, this paint can looks like it's kind of been used a little bit. Looks like it's been dripping, so it might not be completely full, but for calculation purposes and making things kind of equal, we just assume that they are the average mass of a paint can, so that's why we just use that 1.36 grams to just keep a consistent mass, to show the kinetic energy. So overall, we were able to find the period and kinetic energy of each pendulum. We were able to separate the two and kind of do kinetic energy calculations for each pendulum. Although we assumed that both masses for both paint cans were about the same, they did have different velocities. The first velocity was a lot slower than the second, which gave it a lower kinetic energy. The second paint can did have a higher velocity, which increased the kinetic energy for it. Although they did have different kinetic energies, both robbers still ended up in the same spot when they fell down the stairs. I think this is because the lower energy hit the larger male and the higher energy hit the smaller male, so it kind of balanced it out and put them in the same spot. I think both of the pendulums having the same period with the same length kind of gave them roughly a similar kinetic energy, just because they were going through the same oscillation with the same mass. But after using the theory of pendulums and using this movie scene, we're able to show that the usage of pendulums in this movie were real and pretty accurate, and we're all pretty much overall impressed with this 8-year-old kid and how he was able to construct and properly execute two working pendulums at the same time.